is the DCRTV podcast, covering radio, television, and all media for Washington, Baltimore, and beyond. DCRTV.
The story of WOOK begins in the heyday of AM radio. WOOK AM 1340 was a larger-than-life urban radio station. They had a huge following. At the time, they were considered one of the biggest urban stations in the entire country. Unfortunately, the owner, a guy named Richard Eaton, was involved in a numbers racket. Basically, it was an illegal gambling scheme where listeners would pick numbers and send cash to the radio station. Richard would then pick numbers and give a cash prize to the person that won. It sounds kind of crazy. Like something like this, I don't think could happen today, but this is what happened back in the 1970s. So Richard would announce the numbers in a coded fashion. Here's a clip of what it sounded like.
Or send a postcard or letter to our message of hope in care of this station. Be sure to ask for one or more copies of Broadcast 120. That's Broadcast 120, Broadcast 120. Until tomorrow, God bless you, everyone.
The Federal Communications Commission found out what was going on. They weren't happy with it, and they actually took away the license of the radio station. So now Richard Eaton and his company, United Broadcasting, had a big problem that they had this huge radio station that was going to go off the air. Mike Burke was actually working there at this time. Mike, take over for me. Tell me what was happening on the inside.
Someone had the brilliant idea. I believe it was Bill Paris, who convinced Mr. Eaton, Richard Eaton, who was president of United Broadcasting Company at the time. He said, hey, look, why don't we switch to FM? Because FM is going to be the new wave of radio listening. And WFAN, which was, I believe it was Spanish sports or something like that. And they switched formats over from AM Super Soul 1340 to 100.3. They kept the call letters, and the moniker was OK 100, the sound of the city. And it immediately shot to the top of the ratings. OK 100 was number one, not only in average quarter-hour shares, they were number one also in cum listening. So they were the most listened to radio station, and people listened to them the longest when they were listening to the radio. So it was very exciting to be a part of that team working at OK 100 during the late 1970s.
OK 100 was at the top of the DC ratings for a long time, but eventually something changed and they ended up slipping in the ratings. United Broadcasting tried everything to turn the station around. They brought in different people. They changed the call letters. They changed the format, but nothing seemed to work. They could never reclaim their top spot in the DC ratings. On the podcast today, we're going to see what happened. We're going to get the inside story of what happened and why things just didn't work out for the radio station. Joining us on the podcast today is Mike Burke.
DCRTV.
Mike, what years were you at 100.3?
I got hired in 1979 and left the company in 1993 when United Broadcasting sold 100.3.
Okay, so that was right around the time that they were going to FM?
Well, it was a couple of years thereafter because the transition from WOOK Super Soul 1340 AM happened December of 1976, and I got there in 79.
So musically, was the AM and the FM the same, or when they switched to FM, did they change up the music a little bit?
No, it was pretty much a complete switch. They just took the top 40 black or top 40 R&B, which they were playing on 1340 AM, and just moved it over to FM. At that time, the only quote unquote popular FM station was 360 Degrees of Blackness, WHUR, owned by Howard University. And OK100 became the first black formatted commercial station on FM.
And then as far as the competition on AM, I know WOL was a pretty big station at that time. Was there anyone else doing an urban format?
No one was really doing an urban format. You had WEAM with Barry Richards and that crew out in Northern Virginia, who they played a lot of R&B, but it was still basically your pop station on AM.
Now, one thing that I was wondering about is, so you look at the WOOK call letters, like that was a very well-known name back in the days of AM radio. When they switched to FM, why do you think they didn't just call it WOOK FM? Why did they go with OK100? Well,
because at that time, FM stations were popping up over the country, and it was just fashionable, or the thing at that time, to have a moniker that part of your call letters and your frequency. And that was the thing back in the day.
Okay.
OK100, the sound of the city, sounded a lot more slick than WOOK FM.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So then how did things change? So you have this monster station, and I found some ratings online, and it was incredible, the numbers that WOOK was getting back in the 70s. So like, when did things kind of change and the station kind of started their decline in the ratings?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the false perception of the direction that the market was headed at the time. And a lot of the program directors that were hired, they were reactionary instead of being proactive. And that led to the decline. Also, budgets for competing stations like the NBC owned and operated WKYS, they had a lot of, they had deeper pockets than United Broadcasting. So they were able to outspend and outmarket and outpromote their radio stations, which helped them in an increase. And of course, we suffered a decrease.
So I know that WKYS had come into the urban format, that I think they had been like a top 40 station, and at some point they switched to urban. Well, do you remember about when they became an urban station?
Yeah, actually, they were like disco stereo.
Right, that's right. Okay.
They were disco stereo with Eddie Edwards on in the morning and Donnie Simpson in the afternoon. And when OK100 hit, the folks over at WKYS was like, well, there's obviously enough pie for everybody, so we'll go after them. And they did. And they were very successful for a number of years.
And so when they went urban, Donnie Simpson went to mornings. He took over as program director.
Correct.
And they kind of took off right away too, right? Didn't they have a ton of success?
Did, because a lot of times program directors, they are slow to change. They are slow to accept change. And one of our program directors was very slow to change his radio philosophy in the direction that the market was headed. And it cost us. It cost us ratings. Whereas Donnie Simpson at the time, he recognized that the market was shifting and people's taste in music was shifting. And I'll never forget, I heard him in an interview. He said that KYS people asked him to describe WKYS's format. He says, I call it dis-dat. A little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah. And this was like the early 80s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this was like the early 80s. You got it.
Now, it's pretty fierce competition in morning radio, especially back then. Was there anything that you guys did to try to get under his skin a little bit?
And I did a character called Donnie Simpleton. And what we did was, it was an impression of Donnie, so good that a lot of people thought that it was actually Donnie. And we played on the fact that Donnie did a lot of name dropping and what have you. And shortly thereafter, we got a cease and desist letter from NBC asking
great.
us to, stop with the characterization.
That's great. That's great. So, but overall, big picture, you guys are trying to go up against Donnie in the morning. Musically, the station is just, it sounds like it's maybe a little bit off, that maybe KYS is doing a better job musically.
Well, yeah. Again, you had people that were from the Midwest who had a certain sound that Donnie liked on the radio. And, OK 100 was, no question, it was ethnic. It was black. Mm-hmm. The personalities with the music over at KYS was homogenized, if you will. And it just had it started to have a broader appeal than OK 100.
Mm. So it sounds like at this point, this is when United Broadcasting realized that they had to do something, and that's when they switched the call letters to WDJY.
Right. That's when WDJY came in, that concept. And it was 100 hits. Program director Dan O'Neill. And Dan O'Neill, he was a United Broadcasting guy. Mm-hmm. He had come from WYST, 92 Star in Baltimore, where he had success as program director up there, and they brought him into Washington to compete in the hot contested market. It was short-lived. Really didn't go anywhere in the ratings. There was some progress trying to position the station between an urban and a CHR, contemporary hit radio, but ultimately it just didn't really move the needle a whole lot.
Did musically, did the station change a lot, or was it more of just branding the station differently, hoping that would
musically the station did change.
Okay.
Went from playing top 40 black to a mix of top 20 CHR hits and top 20 R&B hits.
Okay.
And they wanted to position the station as quote unquote churban, if you will.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I remember you guys doing back then was that you had the slogan 5 strong songs in a row.
Right. That came immediately after Dan O'Neill left. They hired Brute Bailey, who had huge success in New Orleans at WYLD. And he was a dynamo of a program director, Vietnam veteran. And thank you, Brute, for your service to our country. And he identified the fact that we played 5 songs in a row, where everybody was playing 5 songs in a row. But he actually branded the station saying we were playing 5 songs in a row. And it gave a perception that we were playing more music when we weren't playing any more music than the other stations.
Right.
But that was the psychology behind his, TED offensive against the enemy, WKYS and WPGC.
Yeah. And, sometimes it's just as simple as that. You don't have to change anything. You just have to let people know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that worked. Now, as far as promotions back then, I know Luke Katz and LBD, they were talking about how back in the 80s, some of these stations were giving away crazy prizes like new cars, and one station was giving away a house. Was WDJY doing any of those crazy promotions back then?
No, not really. Brute Bailey, who was our program director, we were playing more strong songs. And he felt that what we could do is give away a prize that was very practical, and people felt that they had a better chance of winning this prize than, a brand new car. And the prize was a Sony Walkman. Sony Walkman were very popular at that time, extremely popular.
Right.
And Bruce said, what we'll do is we'll just give away a Sony Walkman every hour. And that had a huge impact in our ascent in the ratings. We climbed quite a bit behind that promotion, but he also had the station anchored in the community, and he felt that the more we were involved with the community and supporting the community, there was no way we could lose, and that did add icing to the cake.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, community involvement is so important. I think having a prize that people think there's a better chance they're going to win, they're more likely to be engaged with the radio station. So I think that was a smart move. Now, in the late 80s, WPGC came back into the format, or it came back into like an urban top 40 hybrid, and they found immediate success. Was that, would you say that was really, I don't want to say the downfall, but maybe made things a lot more difficult for DJY?
Well, yeah, it did. It made it a lot more difficult because we said we played 5 strong songs in a row, and then WPGC came back behind us, and I forgot what number they said they were playing.
18 in a row.
Well, in an average radio listener's mind, 18 in a row is more than 5 or 10 in a row.
Yep.
And they don't care, the average listener doesn't care, really what the radio station is or who the radio station is. All I know is I can get 18 songs in a row over here, whereas you guys are only playing maybe 5 or 10 songs over here. I mean, we did launch a TED offensive against WPGC. As a matter of fact, at that time, our program director, Burke Bailey, had referred to WPGC as white punks gone crazy. And he actually was saying on the air and encouraged us to say it on the air.
That's funny.
In an attack against WPGC, because they're not really, they may be involved in the community, but we are committed to the community. Just like the example he used to give us in an announcers meeting. He says the chicken is involved when it comes to breakfast, because they will lay an egg and go on about their business. But we're like the pig, we're like the hog. We were committed because the pig or the hog gives up the bacon and the ham, and they're done. So that was the unique thing, that his perspective, which all of us shared at the time, about how, the difference between PGC being involved in the community and DJY actually being committed to the community.
Now, we had an air check of the week from Hot 100 on DCRTV.com a few weeks ago. And one of the things I noticed in that is that you guys were talking about playing 20 songs in a row. So I guess that was, you were trying to out PGC. Correct.
Yeah. That would be a fair assessment.
Yeah.
We were trying to out PGC. Now that I look back, I'm not so sure if that was a good programming strategy or tactic, because, let them have that thing, and, we go ahead on and we be creative and do our own thing. And that will attract people to us, as opposed to folks saying, y'all just copying PGC.
Yeah, exactly. I think that probably would have been a better move to be yourself and to just put on a better product.
I
Now,
would agree.
now with Hot 100, that lasted for a little bit. But I heard a rumor, and you got to tell me if this is true or not, that one day the program director came in and decided he was going to change formats to Jazzy 100 and didn't tell anybody. Is that true?
Did not. He did not. The program director was Beeman Johnson at the time. BJ, he was the morning man. He was BJ's morning thing under Hot 100 FM. He was program director, and he decided, you know what? I think we're going to go in another direction. A direction where there's a wide open market. And at the time, it was smooth jazz, and he changed the format to a smooth jazz format.
And he didn't tell anybody at corporate. He didn't tell the general manager.
He didn't tell a soul.
That just doesn't seem possible that could happen. But that's crazy. So he just came in one day and said, "This is what we're doing now."
Yeah, this is what we're doing. To the surprise and to the surprise of management at the station. Let me see. Bud Myers was general manager. Jack Wamsley was sales manager. Zamira Jones, national sales manager, and Jack Simpson, who was assistant general manager. John Turk, John Edwards was operations manager, and it was just like it was like chaotic.
Yeah,
because it's like they're like, what the hell has he done? Who did you consult?
Right.
Bill Paris, who was vice president of programming for United Broadcasting at the time, had no idea that this was happening, and it was very chaotic.
Yeah, but I guess that they stuck with it. What else are you going to do?
They had to because the die had been cast, and now we're playing smooth jazz. We're not even playing top 40, or we're not even doing the Turbine format anymore. We went in a complete opposite direction, smooth jazz, and I guess a request with the FCC was filed to change the call letters from WDJY to WJZY, as in Jazzy 100.
Mm-hmm. And so they went with that for a few years, and then United Broadcasting ended up selling the station then in the early 90s.
Yeah. And around 1992, 93, United Broadcasting says, okay, we're going to divest. We're going to sell off the different properties. There was stations in Cleveland, of course, Baltimore, Washington, United Production Studios out in Los Angeles, KSOL in San Francisco, which was a very popular number one station out there for a couple of decades. They decided that we're just going to get out of radio. WINX in Rockville.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided that they were going to get out of radio, and the rest is history.
So,
and you're right. That was 1993.
Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what went wrong. Because with you walking through all the changes that they made over the 10 or 15 years that the station started to decline, and it just seemed like they could never turn things around. Nope. From your perspective, is there anything that they missed that maybe they should have done differently?
Well, I was there from 1979 to 1993 when they sold the company. And I had a chance to work different air shifts and held different positions inside the radio station. And I think what it was is the market was changing. And you had people who were stuck in their ways in management. Not everybody, but some people were stuck in their ways. and they just wanted to, no, let's stick with what we got. And I'm not quite sure if the direction that we've gone in, is the direction we should be going in. And then too, there was other stations had started to increase their promotional budgets, and that was really that was the beginning of the end. I think United Broadcasting knew that they were going to get out of radio, and they decided, we're not going to put any more money into this. We're done, we're finished, and we'll just exit quietly.
Let me ask you something else. This is speculation on my part, but
yeah.
But if you look at the other urban stations you're going up against, PGC, KYS, HUR, they all had really good signals. And I know that I don't want to say the 100.3 signal was bad, but they improved it at one point when they moved the tower to Arlington. Do you think that this signal was a factor at all?
Most definitely. Yeah. Most definitely. Because the tower was right there located behind the radio station at Fort Totten, right off of First Place Northeast and Riggs Road. It did not, the affected radiated power for OK100 was really no match for HUR, that could be heard, that was at 50,000 watts, but their antenna was in one of the highest places in the District of Columbia, and they can be heard in parts of Pennsylvania, Delaware, obviously Northern Virginia, Maryland, Eastern Shore, Maryland, West Virginia. So, the signal was a big part of it. PGC had a nice 50,000 watt signal, and I think I'm not quite sure what our wattage was, but I think at the time it was like 35,000 watts or something like that. But our signal was not as strong as the other radio stations.
That's too bad, because today the signal is great. I mean, 100.3 has a great signal today. It's too bad they couldn't fix that. Now, something else that in doing research for our interview today, I saw that Richard Eaton, the owner of United Broadcasting, had died in 1981. And I know he was a big presence at WOOK. He was very involved in the stations. Do you think that his death maybe had something to do with the station kind of losing their way?
Yeah, absolutely. It has something to do with the entire company, because his son Pierre, at the time, I'm not quite sure Pierre had the same drive or the same passion that Mr. Eaton had. I mean, it was kind of like my father has passed, and now I've got these chain of radio stations. He had worked under his dad, pretty much all his life, and that had a lot to do with it. Yeah, the passing of Richard Eaton.
Yeah,
who was founder and president of the United Broadcasting Company.
So tell us about us. So you mentioned in '93 when the station got sold that I guess everybody got released at that point. Tell us about what you've done since then, because you had an incredible career in DC radio.
Thank you. Most people are not aware that I was on the air in DC for 35 years. 35 years, from 1979 to 2012, 2013. After OK100, I went and worked with Bill Parrish, who was vice president of programming with United Broadcasting. I worked at WINX, where we trimulcast on 1600 AM in Rockville, and then the 50,000 watt AM station at 1010, and there was a FM station at 94.3. After that, I was hired by Radio 1 on Magic 102.3, where I did overnights. And I called the show Magic After Midnight, and then after 2 a.m. it was Late Night Magic. I was there for almost 8 years, 8 calendar years. After leaving Magic 102.3, Jim Watkins, who had known me since I was a freshman at Howard, had Dave Dickinson, who was the program director at the time, give me a call because he heard that I had just recently left Magic 102.3. And he says, we're going to make Mike Burke the first refugee from Radio 1. And they hired me as freelance. And I was at HUR for 7 years, did different shifts, basically overnights and weekends. And that a couple of days after I was hired by by HUR, WTOP hired me to do traffic. Well, initially hired me for operations, which is a combination of production and first level engineering, IT. WTOP hired me, and then I became one of their traffic reporters. When I left Washington, not only was I on the air at the number 1 station, I was on the air at the number 2 station.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And you've got
And then when I got to Florida, I was hired by WFLM, Alice and Larry Lee, who Midway Broadcasting in Port St. Lucie, Florida. I was there for 3 years, and the last 7 years, another Hubbard radio station. I was there. Well, it wasn't Hubbard at the time, but eventually became Hubbard. X1023 WMBX in West Palm Beach, which is where I've been since I left DC.
Now, you've got to wrap up here with telling us a pretty inspirational story of how you got the job at TOP. And I think this is a great story just because you never know where your next job is going to come from. And you got the job there in a pretty unique way. Yeah,
I did. Those people who know me well know that I've had a dual career for the last 52 years, radio broadcasting and restaurant operations. And at the time, I was assistant manager / trainer for Ruby Tuesday. And I was managing the Ruby Tuesday on Wisconsin and Van Ness, right across from Channel 9. Well, one day at lunch, the guys from WTOP came in there, and I knew they were from TOP because I could read it on their shirts. Brian Oliger, George Moshes, rest his soul, he was in charge of production. Brian Oliger was the IT guy, and there were a couple of others. I can't remember who else was present, but I was like, hey, WTOP, welcome to Ruby Tuesday. And he said, hey, well, thank you. He said, well, what do you know about WTOP? And I said, well, you used to be on 1500 AM. I said, then you move over to 103.5 and 107.7. I said, and the station that's on 1500 AM now is called Federal News Radio. And you switch the call letters for Extra 104. And he was like, Brian Oliger said, wow, you know more about that than you know more about us than a lot of people in the building.
Right.
And with that, I asked him, I said, hey, does Mike Paris still work there? That's Bill Paris's son. And they was like, yeah, he works in, George was like, yeah, he works in my department. So I said, when you get back to the station, tell him I said hello, you know? When they got back, they asked him, and he called me right away. And he said, hey, man, you made a good impression with, my boss and a couple of other people that work at the station. He says, you go to the website and apply for a position in operations. I did. I got called in and I got interviewed by Mike McMurdy and Lisa Wolf, who was the program director. McMurdy was news director. And they asked me, they said, okay, are you familiar with ENPS? I had no idea what they were talking about. And I said, yeah, I am. He says, okay, here's what we need. We need 5 stories. Write it in the present tense. And if you like, you can attach some audio to it, and we'll see you in about 25 minutes. So I quickly got on my phone and Googled what ENPS was. And I found out, and then I was able to, I've always been able to write. And I wrote 6 stories, 5 news stories. Ooh, excuse me. I wrote 5 news stories and a sports story. I had sound attached using ENPS, and that was enough to convince them. Say, hey, this guy's on top of things. Let's hire him. And the rest is history. I was there for 7 years, and at HUR for 7 years.
What an incredible career. Mike Burke, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. To summarize what I've learned, there's 4 reasons why OK100 and WDJY didn't make it. The first one is musical tastes were changing at the time, and it seems like KYS, PGC, and HUR did a better job of picking up on that. The second one is United Broadcasting was a smaller company. They just didn't have the budget that some of the other radio stations had to compete. The third one is their signal. I think they were operating at a real disadvantage. KYS, PGC, HUR have just great signals, and the 100.3 signal at that time just, I think, made it really challenging to compete. And then the fourth thing is I think Richard Eaton passing away had to play a huge factor in the downfall of the radio station. It just seemed like he was a real force at the radio station, and I think when they lost him, that they really, I think, were working at a disadvantage. Well, thank you so much for checking out the DCRTV podcast. Make sure you follow along. We're at DCRTV.com.
DCRTV.